She never imagined that a single message could shake the ground beneath her feet. The words stared back at her from the screen, cold and unforgiving, and in that instant, the life she thought she knew began to unravel. The room felt heavier, the air thicker, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for the storm that had quietly gathered beyond her door. Her hands trembled, barely able to grip the edges of the countertop, and a hollow ache spread through her chest, a warning she could neither ignore nor name. Outside, the sun cast an unusually sharp light across the street, highlighting the stillness that had always felt comforting but now seemed ominous. Every small sound, the distant hum of traffic, the faint rustle of leaves, the soft tick of the clock, echoed like a signal of things unseen, secrets waiting to rise to the surface. She sensed that the calm she had relied upon for years was only an illusion, a fragile veneer over a reality that had already begun to shift. Memories flickered in her mind, fragments of conversations, fleeting glances, and subtle inconsistencies she had dismissed as trivial. Now they felt like signs she had been blind to, pieces of a puzzle she never knew she was meant to solve. Her pulse quickened with a mixture of fear and disbelief, the room spinning slightly as if time itself had decided to tilt. She knew, in a way her heart understood before her mind could, that nothing would ever be the same. The quiet before the storm had settled deep into her bones, and the truth, however hidden, was about to break through. She started her morning the way she always did, the small rituals of routine offering a fleeting sense of control. The kettle hissed as water boiled, filling the kitchen with a comforting warmth that seemed at odds with the unease lingering in her chest. Outside, the city stirred to life, the distant rumble of buses, the occasional bark of a dog, the faint murmur of neighbors beginning their day. She moved through these ordinary sounds almost mechanically, aware of every detail yet strangely detached, as if her mind was already wandering to the message she could not erase from her thoughts. Her clothes were neatly pressed, shoes aligned perfectly at the door, the same route to work traced by memory more than intention. Breakfast was quiet, a slice of toast, a cup of tea she barely tasted, each sip more for routine than satisfaction. Her husband's absence was noticeable in ways that had become too familiar. An empty chair, the silence of the hallway, the unmade bed that hinted at restless nights or late departures. She found herself scanning for signs in the mundane, the misplaced keys, a forgotten jacket, a note left on the counter, but the ordinary details offered no comfort, only a subtle reminder that everything might already be shifting beneath the surface. Driving through the familiar streets, she noticed things she had always ignored. The cracked sidewalk outside the corner store, the faded paint on the mailboxes, the way the sunlight caught on the windows of the office building she passed each day. Every detail felt amplified, urgent, as if the city itself was conspiring to remind her that nothing remained static, not even the life she had taken for granted. At work, the familiar hum of computers, the chatter of colleagues, and the scent of coffee were anchors to normalcy. Yet even here, the quiet anxiety of the morning shadowed her steps. She went through her tasks methodically, responding to emails, arranging documents, attending brief meetings, all while a small, persistent dread tugged at her thoughts. Even as the day unfolded in predictable patterns, she could not shake the feeling that the ordinary world around her had begun to shift imperceptibly. Shadows seemed deeper, laughter a fraction too loud, conversations carrying unspoken weight. Every glance at her phone, every distant footstep in the hallway, seemed pregnant with meaning, as if the universe was signaling that the calm she had trusted so completely was fragile, fleeting, and already slipping through her fingers. By the end of the morning, the routines that once comforted her now felt like a prelude, a calm that existed only to make the approaching storm more striking. She paused at her desk, hands resting lightly on the keyboard, and allowed herself a moment to breathe, though the unease in her chest would not release. Outside, the day pressed forward, unremarkable to anyone else, yet for her, each second carried the weight of anticipation, of change poised at the edge of awareness, waiting for the moment it would sweep everything away. By midday, the weight in her chest had grown heavier, an invisible pressure that made even the simplest tasks feel monumental. The messages she had received that morning lingered like shadows on the edges of her mind, and every interaction carried an unspoken significance. At the office, the usual hum of activity felt sharper, each laugh a little too loud, each glance a little too pointed. She noticed colleagues exchanging brief, hurried whispers when they thought she was not looking, and the subtle change in their tones made her skin prickle. Something was shifting, but its exact shape remained hidden just beyond reach. Bills and mortgage notices stacked neatly on her desk reminded her of the fragility of her daily existence. Every unpaid balance, every overdue payment, seemed to echo the uncertainty growing in her personal life. Her husband's distance had become more pronounced over the past weeks. Late nights, vague excuses, unanswered questions, and each omission now felt like a deliberate act, a prelude to a revelation she feared but could not yet name. She tried to focus on the marketing reports she was preparing, but the numbers blurred, the colors of charts merging into one another as her mind wrestled with anxiety that would not abate. Even mundane interactions with co-workers carried weight she had not noticed before. A colleague's casual remark about a deadline or a missed call seemed loaded, as if everyone around her possessed knowledge she did not. The building itself felt different. The elevators seemed slower, the air conditioners hummed sharper, the sunlight through the windows casting strange shadows that made the space feel unfamiliar. Her senses were heightened, and the ordinary became extraordinary, each minor irregularity magnified by her growing unease. Her lunch break offered little relief. The cafeteria, normally a place of idle conversation and soft laughter, seemed distant, almost mocking in its normalcy. She caught fragments of conversations that sounded innocuous on the surface but carried a tone of urgency she could not ignore. In the echo of footsteps behind her, in the way her chair scraped against the floor, she felt the tension mounting, pressing in on her from every side. She realized with a sharp pang that the calm she had relied upon, the predictable rhythm of her life, was already eroding. By mid-afternoon, the tension had begun to seep into her physical self. Her shoulders ached as if bearing invisible weight, her chest felt tight, and her hands shook ever so slightly when she reached for the next stack of papers. Every new email, every phone notification, triggered a tiny spike of panic, a reminder that something critical was imminent. She could no longer rely on routine to anchor her, and the ordinary walls of the office, once comforting, now seemed like a cage waiting to close around her. The longer she sat in that familiar space, the more she sensed the unraveling that had quietly begun. Conversations that had once been casual now hinted at secrets. Smiles that had been warm now felt rehearsed. Each passing moment drew her closer to the edge, a growing certainty that something, she did not yet know what, was about to fracture her life entirely. The early tension had fully settled, pressing like a tide ready to surge, and she could do nothing but wait for the inevitable revelation that would define everything that came next. The office hummed with life, yet to her it felt like a different world entirely, one that she had always moved through with practiced ease but now seemed layered with unknowns. Her colleagues, once familiar and predictable, were suddenly strangers with hidden motives. Mira, with her easy laughter and quick jokes, now spoke in clipped sentences that carried hints of caution. Harper, who rarely said more than necessary, watched everything with a subtle intensity that made her own instincts prick with unease. Even Lewis, the friendly IT technician, seemed to linger just a second too long when offering help. His smiles shadowed with something unreadable. The layout of the office, once comforting in its symmetry, now appeared labyrinthine. Cubicles that had always felt open and familiar now cast long shadows, partitions hiding whispers, papers, and secrets. The scent of coffee, previously a simple comfort, was now sharp and almost metallic, mingling with the faint aroma of printer ink and cleaning solutions. Every ring of a phone, every distant murmur of a meeting, carried weight, as if each sound were layered with meaning she had never noticed before. Beyond the walls of the office, the city itself seemed to mirror her growing disquiet. From her desk, she could see the streets below alive with ordinary motion. Taxis weaving through traffic, people hurrying with purpose, store windows reflecting a sun that seemed too bright and glaring. Yet in that ordinary rhythm, she caught small inconsistencies. A delivery van parked for longer than necessary, a shadow lingering near the crosswalk, a figure moving in a pattern that felt deliberate. The world she had taken for granted now had a pulse, a hidden undercurrent she had never acknowledged. Her home, too, took on a new resonance. Each room she had moved through 1,000 times suddenly held meaning. The kitchen, where the kettle whistled every morning, now felt like a silent witness to secrets. The living room, its furniture perfectly arranged, seemed to frame absences rather than presence. Even the bedroom, where she and her husband had shared quiet moments, carried a subtle tension, a memory of conversations left unfinished and questions unasked. Every object, every arrangement, seemed to speak in whispers, suggesting histories and truths she had not fully comprehended. The people she passed daily became part of this subtle web of signals. Neighbors who smiled politely now seemed to glance in her direction with an intensity she could not place. The barista at the corner cafe had begun asking questions about things she had not mentioned, and the receptionist at her office offered greetings that lingered too long, as if weighing her reactions. Even minor details, the cracked sidewalk, the flicker of a streetlight, the rhythm of passing footsteps, felt like messages in a language she was only beginning to understand. By mid-afternoon, she felt caught in two overlapping worlds, one of routine, comfort, and predictable patterns, and another that pulsed beneath the surface, filled with subtle signals, hidden motives, and unspoken truths. Every glance, every sound, every movement became a clue in a puzzle she had not realized existed. The ordinary reality she had trusted now seemed layered with complexities she had never accounted for, a world in which every person and every object could hold significance. The city, the office, the home, the people, they all coexisted in a way that made her acutely aware of her own vulnerability. Each interaction, no matter how casual, became a potential thread leading toward revelation. In the quiet spaces between conversations, in the pauses between footsteps and the soft hum of computers, she felt the shape of what was coming. The world was alive in ways she had ignored, and its pulse was synchronizing with her growing anxiety, preparing her for the turning point that she sensed was inevitable. By the end of this stretch, the environment around her was no longer background. It had become a character in itself, subtle, observant, patient, and capable of revealing truths at precisely the moment she would need to see them. The ordinary walls, the hum of machinery, the distant city streets, the casual gestures of those around her, they were all threads in the tapestry of tension, carefully weaving a reality that was poised to tip and spill everything she had thought she knew. By late afternoon, an unease had settled deep into her chest, a constant pressure that would not release. Every small sound in the office felt magnified, the ring of a phone, the scrape of a chair, the faint shuffle of papers. Her heartbeat quickened each time someone passed her desk, even if it was only a familiar colleague moving about their day. A single glance or half-spoken sentence now seemed heavy with intent, and she could not tell if it was real or if her mind was bending ordinary events into shadows. An unexpected email appeared in her inbox, subject line vague and unsigned. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, reluctant to open what might confirm the dread curling in her stomach. She told herself it was routine, a scheduling update or a client request, but the pit in her stomach refused reassurance. Her mind raced through every possible scenario, her thoughts darting like restless birds trapped in a cage, each one louder than the last. Her phone buzzed again, this time a message from someone close, a line that carried a weight she could not ignore. She read it and reread it, parsing every word, analyzing every punctuation, every space, as if the secret meaning had been coded in its structure. The more she searched for clarity, the more the message felt like a riddle she had no right to solve. The walls of the office, once familiar and grounding, now pressed inward, and she felt herself shrinking into her chair, small and uncertain, caught in a storm she could neither name nor escape. Even the people she trusted seemed to shift around her. Mira smiled as she passed, but there was a stiffness in her gesture she had not noticed before. Harper's eyes followed her for just a moment too long, then darted away when she caught them. Even Lewis lingered near her desk, offering assistance she did not need. His presence suddenly heavy, almost intrusive. The ordinary interactions that had once been comforting now felt like a network of subtle warnings, fragments of information she was only beginning to see. At home, the tension followed her. The hallway was darker than usual as she returned, shadows stretching across familiar walls. Every object seemed to carry weight. The coffee mug she had left on the counter, the jacket carelessly draped over the chair, even the faint hum of the refrigerator felt amplified. She could almost sense the life moving behind closed doors, the things that were said and left unsaid, the secrets that had always existed but were now surfacing in ways she could no longer ignore. Her thoughts spiraled. She questioned every detail she had taken for granted, every conversation, every glance, every action that had once seemed trivial. What had been routine now seemed coded, a series of signs she had failed to read. Her anxiety grew, coiling tighter with every passing moment, a relentless pressure in her chest, a reminder that the calm she relied upon was dissolving. By the final minutes of the afternoon, she could barely focus on work at all. Each new email, each phone call, each passing colleague heightened the sense of impending crisis. The tension had fully taken root, threading through every thought and movement, whispering that something crucial was about to emerge, a revelation that would demand attention and change everything. The ordinary day she had trusted to carry her safely had dissolved, leaving only the raw, pulsing awareness that the world was no longer predictable, and that the storm waiting just beyond the surface was gathering strength. She had barely settled back at her desk when she heard it, a snippet of conversation that made her freeze mid-breath. From across the partition, two colleagues spoke in low tones, but the words carried with unnatural clarity, slicing through the hum of the office. She leaned closer, trying to dismiss it as idle gossip, but each phrase felt deliberate, as if intended for her ears alone. Her pulse spiked, a jolt of electricity racing through her limbs, and she realized that what she was overhearing could not be accidental. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of her desk, trying to focus on the documents before her. The words replayed in her mind, half-spoken accusations, hints of deception, references she could not fully place yet. She felt a strange mixture of disbelief and mounting dread. Something she had assumed was solid, unquestionable, had already shifted beneath her feet. She knew instinctively that this moment would become a pivot point, the first clear sign that her carefully constructed life was about to be upended. For a moment, she considered walking away, pretending she had not heard a thing, but curiosity and fear held her rooted in place. Every instinct told her to pay attention, to gather the fragments, to understand what had been hidden in plain sight. The office around her continued its steady rhythm, the ringing phones, the chatter, the clatter of keyboards. But for her, the hum of normalcy had fractured, replaced by a sharpened awareness that danger or betrayal might be closer than she realized. She tried to make sense of the conversation, replaying the words in her mind, searching for context. Names she recognized, phrases that sounded familiar but slightly off, and hints of actions that contradicted everything she thought she knew began to assemble in an uneasy puzzle. Her stomach knotted as she realized this was not just office drama or coincidence. It was something personal, something that touched her life in ways she could not yet articulate. Her eyes flicked to her phone, half expecting another message to confirm her fear, but it remained silent, leaving her suspended between the known and the unknown. Each passing second intensified her anxiety, every subtle noise a potential clue, every shadow in the partition a reminder that she was not the only one aware, that secrets were being guarded, and that she had stumbled directly into their perimeter. By the final minutes, the office had resumed its apparent calm, but for her, the world had irrevocably shifted. She sat frozen, heart racing, mind spinning, fully aware that this overheard fragment was the catalyst, the spark that would ignite the storm, forcing her to confront truths she had long avoided. What she had just heard was only the beginning, and already she could feel the trajectory of her life veering into uncharted territory. After that fleeting overheard conversation, the ordinary rhythm of the day no longer existed for her. Each interaction felt layered with hidden meaning. Every glance from a colleague seemed to carry a message, every passing whisper a warning she might not yet fully understand. The puzzle had begun to form, pieces she could sense but could not yet fit together, and the unease that had been simmering now surged with urgency. She caught herself replaying fragments of the conversation, listening for subtleties she might have missed, questioning the tone, the choice of words, the pauses between them. Her mind refused to settle. Even the smallest details became magnified. A door closing a fraction too slowly, a phone vibrating on a colleague's desk, the way someone's eyes lingered on her papers before looking away. She started keeping mental notes, stringing together moments that had previously seemed mundane. Her instincts screamed that the seemingly innocent office chatter was hiding a larger truth, one that could affect everything she had built. By the afternoon, her anxiety transformed into a quiet vigilance. She began observing her co-workers more closely, noticing patterns she had overlooked for years. Myra's laughter, once comforting, now seemed forced. Harper's polite gestures carried subtle tension. Even the receptionist's smiles hinted at knowledge she had yet to access. She realized that the office itself had shifted, becoming a network of signals and secrets, a web she was only now seeing in its entirety. At home, the unease followed her like a shadow she could not shake. The familiar layout of her apartment suddenly felt foreign, each room brimming with unspoken questions. The living room that once offered comfort now seemed to hold silent witnesses, and every object, the neatly stacked books, the coffee mugs, the framed photos, appeared laden with hidden significance. She found herself glancing at the photograph of her and her husband from their last vacation, searching for clues in his smile, trying to reconcile the man she knew with the possibility that a different version of him existed, one she had never truly seen. Her investigation was subtle at first, small and cautious. She checked emails twice, retraced conversations, made mental notes of inconsistencies. Every minor discovery, an unanswered message, a deleted call, a vague statement, felt like a piece of a larger puzzle, revealing a reality she had been blind to. The more she uncovered, the more tangled the web became, and a sense of isolation settled over her. She realized that this was no simple office intrigue. The truth was personal, threaded through her life in ways she had never imagined. Even mundane routines now carried weight. The route to the coffee machine, the stairwell she used to avoid the elevator, the timing of breaks and meetings, all became part of a careful observation, as if the environment itself contained clues she must decode. She grew hyper-aware of body language, of hesitations in speech, of lingering glances. The ordinary world had transformed into a labyrinth, each corner a potential revelation, each interaction a test of her perception. By the evening, her thoughts were relentless, circling back to the fragments she had gathered. The mystery had deepened beyond any expectation. She felt herself teetering on the edge of understanding, caught between what she knew, what she suspected, and what she feared to learn. Shadows of the past, half-remembered incidents, and overlooked behaviors now took on new meaning, forcing her to question everything she had believed about the people closest to her and the life she thought she understood. In that stretch of time, she came to one undeniable conclusion. The calm she had relied on was an illusion. The world she thought she inhabited was layered with secrets, and those secrets were beginning to surface with increasing clarity. She felt the tension coil tighter, the stakes rise, and the inevitable confrontation with the truth drawing near. The mystery had deepened, and there was no turning back. The truth hit her like a crashing wave, sudden and merciless. Every careful assumption she had made, every trust she had placed in those closest to her, shattered in a single, undeniable moment. A conversation she had finally overheard, a document she had stumbled upon, or perhaps a glance she had misread for months, all converged to expose the betrayal she had dreaded but never fully imagined. Her stomach twisted with disbelief, a visceral reaction that left her trembling, her chest tight, as if the air itself had thickened around her. She saw it now in sharp relief, the web of deception that had been woven quietly over time. Someone she had loved, someone she had relied upon, had concealed truths that altered the foundation of her life. Details she had once ignored now glared at her in full color. The late nights that were never truly late, the unexplained absences, the small lies that had seemed harmless until now. Each revelation was another splinter in her heart, another confirmation that nothing would ever be the same. The office, once a place of routine and familiarity, had transformed into a theater of exposure. Colleagues she thought of as friends now felt like actors in a play whose script she was only just discovering. Every smile, every casual remark, every meeting she had attended without question now took on a sinister undertone. The betrayal was not only personal but professional, entwined in the very structure of her work and her life. At home, the betrayal felt even more intimate, closer, impossible to ignore. The photograph on her desk, once a symbol of a happy memory, now seemed a mocking reminder of what had been lost. Conversations replayed in her mind with new meaning, gestures and words she had trusted now revealed as manipulations. Anger, sorrow, and disbelief collided, leaving her gasping for breath, each heartbeat echoing with a realization that someone she loved had chosen deceit over honesty. She confronted the evidence, unable to turn away despite the pain it caused. The details, each more damning than the last, painted a portrait of betrayal so complete it was almost cinematic in its cruelty. She saw patterns she had never noticed, connections she had dismissed, intentions she had misread. Everything, from the smallest omission to the most deliberate act, fell into place with horrifying clarity. Tears mingled with anger as she processed the revelation. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, to shake the very people who had betrayed her. Yet beneath the initial shock was a cold, almost analytical recognition that she could not ignore. Understanding the betrayal was the only way to reclaim control. She catalogued the lies, the secrets, the hidden motives, each fragment adding to the undeniable truth that had been hiding in plain sight. By the final minutes, she stood at a crossroads between devastation and awakening. The betrayal had stripped away illusions, leaving only raw reality, painful and vivid. She realized that to survive, to move forward, She would have to confront not just the people who had deceived her but the parts of herself that had trusted too easily, that had ignored the quiet signals until it was almost too late. The revelation was complete, and the world she thought she knew had been irrevocably altered. Her chest felt impossibly heavy, as though every secret she had uncovered pressed down on her lungs, making each breath a labor. Tears came unbidden, hot and relentless, blurring the lines of her carefully ordered world. She sank into her chair, hands trembling, head bowed, unable to comprehend how the person she had trusted completely could have orchestrated such deception. The room around her, the hum of computers, the distant chatter, the flicker of sunlight through the blinds, moved in slow motion, a distorted reflection of the chaos inside her mind. Memories she had once cherished now twisted into evidence of betrayal. Every laugh shared, every word spoken, every small gesture that once seemed loving now felt like a lie. Her mind replayed scenes again and again, searching for clues she had missed, answers that might make sense of what now seemed utterly senseless. Anger surged, mingled with grief, leaving her shaking as she realized that the foundation of her life had been quietly eroded without her noticing until now. Her husband's absence in the days that followed the revelation was deafening. The silence of her home, once a sanctuary, now felt like an accusation, each creaking floorboard a reminder of his lies. She screamed inside her own head, longing to confront him, yet paralyzed by the fear of what she might learn. Every corner of her apartment, every familiar object, now carried a shadow, a reminder of trust broken. Even the photographs, once symbols of shared happiness, seemed mocking, evidence of a life she had believed in but which had never truly existed as she imagined. At work, she fought to maintain composure, but the betrayal shadowed every interaction. She flinched at casual remarks, felt suspicion in every glance, and heard hidden meanings in conversations that had once been mundane. Her co-workers noticed the change, some with concern, others with guarded curiosity, but she could not explain the storm raging inside her. Each task, each email, each phone call became an obstacle, not because of their difficulty, but because the weight of her emotions made focus impossible. Nights were the worst. Sleep came in fragments, haunted by replayed conversations and imagined scenarios. Her thoughts circled endlessly, gnawing at her confidence, twisting her sense of reality. Doubt and fear clawed at her, leaving her uncertain of whom she could trust, uncertain even of her own judgment. The betrayal was no longer a distant event. It had taken residence inside her, shaping her thoughts, her emotions, and her every movement. She alternated between tears, silence, and furious pacing, unable to reconcile the love she had felt with the deceit she now understood. The emotional pain was visceral, a constant ache that refused to be soothed. Her anger burned hot, yet grief weighed her down, creating a tension that left her both immobilized and desperate for action. Every heartbeat, every breath, reminded her of the enormity of what she had lost and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. By the end of this period, the crisis had reached a fevered intensity. She was a storm contained within a fragile human form, raw, exposed, and unrelenting. The emotional upheaval had stripped away pretense, revealing both vulnerability and resilience. Even in the midst of devastation, a faint spark of awareness emerged. She could not undo the betrayal, but she could choose how to respond. The emotional crisis, though overwhelming, was the threshold she had to cross to move toward understanding, clarity, and ultimately action. The evening descended like a curtain, heavy and suffocating, yet inside her, the tension refused to ease. She moved through the apartment almost automatically, each step deliberate, every action measured, as if her body were performing the rituals of normalcy while her mind raced in chaotic spirals. The dishes in the sink, the faint smell of unfinished coffee, even the hum of the refrigerator, all became touchstones for a reality she could no longer take for granted. Her thoughts darted from one scenario to another, imagining confrontations, explanations, and confessions. Each possibility felt both terrifying and necessary. She clutched her hands together, feeling the pulse of her own heartbeat as if it were the only certainty left in the world. Shadows stretched along the walls, morphing with every flicker of light, and she imagined figures moving silently in those corners, echoes of betrayal and secrets lurking just beyond perception. Messages, missed calls, and fragments of conversation replayed themselves relentlessly in her memory. She could almost hear the tone of voices, the cadence of sentences, the pauses that hid meaning deeper than words alone could convey. Every small detail now carried significance she had previously ignored. Even the patterns of traffic outside her window, the distant sounds of footsteps in the hallway, seemed to align with a story she had not yet pieced together, a narrative of deception and hidden motives woven carefully around her. Sleep remained elusive. She tried to close her eyes, but images of trust shattered haunted her. Each memory collided with the next, forming a cascade of emotions she could neither control nor contain. Anger coexisted with sorrow, confusion merged with clarity, and a cold sense of isolation gripped her more tightly than any physical restraint could. Her body ached from tension, yet she could not rest, driven by an insatiable need to understand, to anticipate, to prepare for what would come next. By midnight, she sat at the edge of her bed, staring at the darkened ceiling, replaying events with meticulous scrutiny. Each detail she had overlooked now seemed intentional, a deliberate clue in a puzzle of manipulation. Her trust had been exploited, her perception challenged, and her sense of security obliterated. Yet within that storm, a subtle determination began to form, fragile but undeniable. She would not remain a passive witness. She would confront, investigate, and reclaim agency over her life. The hours crawled past, and as the city outside settled into quiet, she realized that the emotional whirlwind had transformed into a focused intensity. Fear and grief had sharpened into vigilance, despair into determination. She understood that the coming days would demand courage, resilience, and careful observation, and that every choice she made now would carry weight far beyond the ordinary. The emotional crisis, though exhausting and relentless, had forced her to awaken to the stark reality of betrayal and the imperative of action. Even in the stillness of the night, the pressure remained, a quiet insistence that she could not ignore. Each sound, each shadow, each recollection acted as a reminder. The truth was out there, waiting to be fully revealed, and the path forward would be neither simple nor forgiving. The storm within her had not subsided. It had evolved, honing her awareness, sharpening her resolve, and preparing her for the confrontation that lay just beyond the horizon. Dawn arrived reluctantly, the first pale light filtering through the blinds, painting the room in muted shades of gray. She remained awake, staring at the floorboards, replaying the fragments of truth she had gathered, tracing every implication, every subtle lie she had discovered. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of the settling structure, yet in that stillness, every sound seemed amplified, every vibration of reality carrying meaning she could not ignore. Her mind shifted constantly, considering allies, potential deceptions, and every hidden agenda she had yet to uncover. Each interaction she remembered over the past weeks now seemed purposeful, calculated, a thread in a tapestry of concealment. Even the smallest gestures, a smile too fleeting or a glance too lingering, revealed patterns she had never noticed before. The realization was dizzying. The life she had taken for granted was riddled with invisible strings, and she had been dancing along them unknowingly. She dressed slowly, every motion deliberate, as if armor could be woven from careful gestures. Breakfast remained untouched. The taste of food was irrelevant compared to the gnawing certainty that she had to act. Every sound from the street, every faint creak of the floor, seemed like a signal, a message demanding vigilance. Her pulse throbbed with a mixture of fear and purpose, a rhythm that mirrored the urgency of a day that promised confrontation, revelation, and transformation. By mid-morning, she arrived at the office with a new lens through which she perceived everything. The fluorescent lights felt sharper, the hum of electronics more insistent, and the chatter of co-workers edged with tension. She observed movements, recorded phrases in her mind, and catalogued facial expressions, sensing that each small detail could be a key to understanding the full scope of the deception. Every casual smile, every half-spoken sentence, carried potential significance. The ordinary environment had become a map, revealing paths she had ignored for years. Her interactions grew precise, measured. Questions were asked cautiously, responses calculated, and every observation filed meticulously. She no longer moved through the office as she once had. She prowled, aware, absorbing information, and ready to catch the moment where the hidden truth would surface completely. A sense of anticipation gripped her. A taut line pulled tight between fear and determination, and she knew the moment of reckoning was imminent. The hours crawled, each second loaded with tension, as if the air itself were aware of the confrontation on the horizon. Her body ached from vigilance, but she remained immobile in resolve, eyes sharp, mind alert, heart steady with controlled intensity. The storm that had been building inside her now found its reflection in the world outside, and she could sense the alignment of circumstances that would force the hidden realities into the light. By the late afternoon, subtle cues began converging. An accidental revelation in conversation, a document carelessly left on a desk, a glance exchanged between those she had once trusted. The puzzle pieces were finally aligning, and the intricate lattice of lies became visible in its entirety. She realized, with a mix of horror and clarity, that the confrontation would demand courage, precision, and unflinching honesty. The truth was no longer a whisper or shadow. It was poised to strike, and she was ready to meet it head-on. The tension had transformed into a controlled, lethal focus. She could feel the approaching moment as a tangible force, pressing against her chest, compelling her to act. Nothing would prepare her for the emotional weight of revelation, yet she understood that she could no longer delay. The stage was set, the actors unknowingly in position, and the culmination of deceit, suspicion, and unanswered questions was about to unfold in ways that would alter her life forever. The door to the conference room creaked as she stepped inside. Her footsteps deliberate, echoing in the empty space. The air was thick with expectation, charged with the unspoken tension of everything that had led to this moment. Her hands were steady now, her mind razor-sharp, every emotion sharpened into focus, yet beneath the control, a storm of hurt, anger, and betrayal still simmered. He was already there, waiting, posture rigid, eyes carefully avoiding hers. The facade of calm he wore was thin, fragile, and she recognized it immediately. Every small twitch, every slight hesitation in his movements, betrayed what he had spent months concealing. The careful world he had built to hide the truth was crumbling, and she was the force dismantling it piece by piece. Words tumbled from her lips before she could second-guess, measured but fierce, cutting through the tension with precision. Questions, accusations, and revelations collided in a rhythm that left no room for evasion. He faltered, stammering, grasping at explanations that sounded hollow, unconvincing, and ultimately irrelevant. Every lie he had told, every omission, every manipulation was laid bare in the stark light of her scrutiny. Her colleagues, unwitting witnesses to the unfolding confrontation, shifted uneasily in their seats, sensing the gravity of the moment. She could see their glances flick between them, realizing the depth of what had been concealed. The weight of years of trust, hope, and shared history pressed heavily on her shoulders, but she did not yield. Every word she spoke, every demand for truth, was an assertion of power, a reclaiming of the agency he had tried to steal. As he faltered further, the reality of his betrayal became undeniable, a concrete force that could no longer be ignored. His defenses, once polished and persuasive, melted under the intensity of her focus. She felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. Satisfaction at exposing the truth, sorrow at the depth of deception she had endured. The emotional landscape of the room shifted, the tension peaking in a charged silence that followed her final statement. She took a step back, allowing the truth to settle between them, a weighty presence impossible to deny. The room felt both smaller and larger at once, compressed by the emotional intensity, expanded by the possibilities now open to her. In that pause, she realized that everything had changed. Nothing could return to its previous state. The storm she had carried internally had finally found its outlet, reshaping her perception, her relationships, and the world around her. Her breath slowed, chest still heaving, as the magnitude of the moment sank in. The confrontation had achieved its purpose. Not vengeance, not punishment, but clarity. The veil had been lifted, and the hidden currents of deceit now lay exposed. She knew the coming days would demand adjustments, decisions, and a courage she had not previously required. Yet, standing there, facing the consequences of truth fully revealed, she also sensed a spark of liberation, the faintest glimmer that amidst betrayal and heartbreak, a new path could emerge. The climax of the storm had passed, leaving raw emotion in its wake, but with it, the possibility of renewal. She had faced the deception head-on, and though the consequences were profound, she was no longer a passive participant in her life. The moment had shifted everything, marking both an ending and the fragile, powerful beginning of what she could now choose to build from the fragments left behind. The tension that had been building for weeks erupted with unstoppable force, consuming her thoughts, her body, and the air around her. Every nerve felt electric, attuned to the subtle motions, half-glances, and unspoken admissions that had been accumulating in the shadows of her life. She could feel the culmination of every suspicion, every overheard whisper, every hidden message pressing against her chest, demanding recognition. The world itself seemed suspended, the usual hum of existence replaced by the thunderous pulse of truth finally breaking free. She moved through the house deliberately, yet every step echoed like a drumbeat, marking the rhythm of her determination. Her mind catalogued every detail she had observed, the patterns of absence, the subtle shifts in tone, the inconsistencies long ignored. Each memory collided with the next, forming a clear picture she could no longer avoid. The betrayal was not partial. It was total, threaded intricately through the life she had shared, the work she had trusted, and the choices she had made believing in stability. Her confrontation was inevitable. When he entered the room, her eyes met his, unflinching and sharp. He tried to mask the tension in his own stance, but every slight twitch betrayed him. Words became instruments of precision. Each question aimed to unravel the defenses he had built with careful calculation. She demanded clarity, refusing evasion, refusing false explanations. The quiet dignity she carried now amplified the force of her presence, making it impossible for him to retreat into rehearsed lies. The truth came spilling forth, raw and jagged. Confessions, admissions, half-truths finally completed, all converged in the room with the weight of inevitability. Every detail she had pieced together over days and nights fell into alignment, forming a coherent narrative of deceit. Anger flared in her chest, burning bright, yet beneath it was an icy clarity. She understood what had been done, why, and the consequences it carried. Each revelation, though painful, was a tool she now held, a map to navigate the treacherous terrain of her life reshaped by betrayal. Her emotions oscillated violently. Waves of grief, indignation, and shock battered her internally, yet she remained poised, controlled, directing every reaction with intent. There was no hysteria, no blind rage. Only a precise and piercing awareness of power reclaimed. She questioned, she pressed, she probed, forcing the truth into the open until it could no longer be denied. The room, once familiar, felt transformed. Walls that had contained routine now enclosed a battlefield, every gesture, every breath, charged with the gravity of revelation. Minutes stretched like hours, the tension taut and unrelenting. She confronted not only the person who had betrayed her, but also the fragments of herself that had trusted blindly, ignored warning signs, and allowed facade to replace reality. Each answer she received reinforced her awareness, the enormity of what she faced impossible to minimize. And yet, within that storm, she found the first flicker of agency, the realization that she could act, could decide, could reclaim control over the life that had been manipulated around her. The confrontation escalated, voices rising with intensity yet measured in precision, each statement a challenge, a counterpoint, a demand for accountability. Emotions that had simmered under the surface for weeks now ignited, but she navigated them with an almost surgical awareness, never losing sight of the ultimate purpose: clarity and liberation. The space seemed to contract and expand simultaneously, time dilating with the magnitude of the moment, making every heartbeat, every pause, every glance feel monumental. Finally, the crescendo arrived. The final truths, previously buried or disguised, were laid bare. Every omission, every lie, every calculated act of deception emerged like jagged fragments, impossible to ignore. She absorbed it all, allowing the impact to resonate fully, letting the emotional weight settle with deliberate acknowledgement. There was no denial, no evasion, only the full, visceral confrontation with reality. When the room fell silent, the intensity did not immediately fade. She felt the remnants of adrenaline, grief, and rage coalesce into a cold, sharp clarity. The storm within her had reached its apex, leaving her raw, exposed, yet profoundly aware. She understood that the climax was not merely about revelation. It was about transformation. The life she had trusted had been fractured, but within that fracture existed the possibility to reconstruct, to redefine, to emerge stronger and more vigilant. By the end, she stood fully present, aware of the enormity of what had occurred, yet resolute. The climax had stripped illusions bare, forced her to confront betrayal without compromise, and demanded a reckoning with both external deception and internal vulnerability. The intensity lingered, a pulse of awareness that would carry her into the next chapter of her life with the weight of truth fully recognized and the first spark of empowerment flickering amid the aftermath of chaos. The room seemed to shrink around her, the walls pressing closer with the weight of confrontation, as if the very space conspired to heighten the stakes. She could feel the seconds stretching, elongating, each one carrying the echo of all the deception she had uncovered. Every subtle movement, every micro-expression of his face, became magnified in her perception. The twitch of a jaw, the hesitation in his voice, the avoidance of her gaze, all communicating truths he could no longer deny. She took deliberate steps closer, each one measured, deliberate, a silent assertion of control. Her chest burned with a mixture of fury and exhaustion, yet each heartbeat grounded her, connecting her awareness to the reality she now commanded. Questions poured from her with relentless precision, probing the full depth of manipulation and secrecy. She would not allow evasion, would not accept half-truths, would not step back until every hidden action, every concealed motive, was fully exposed. The tension became almost tangible, vibrating in the air between them. Words collided, accusations and confessions interweaving into a relentless rhythm. He tried to regain composure, to explain, to justify, but the scaffolding of his lies collapsed under the force of her scrutiny. She recognized patterns she had once dismissed: the careful avoidance of certain topics, the subtle redirection of conversations, the meticulous control of information. Each revelation was a hammer blow, driving the full reality into the open. Emotions surged violently inside her: anger, betrayal, grief, disbelief, but she harnessed them with deliberate focus. Every tear that threatened to fall, every tremor of frustration became fuel, intensifying the precision of her confrontation. She pressed further, demanding clarity, refusing to let anything remain hidden. Each revelation added weight to the moment, making it impossible to retreat into denial or ignore the consequences. The confrontation reached an almost unbearable intensity as she began connecting the dots of months, even years, of subtle manipulation. Every event that had once seemed insignificant now had a purpose, every casual lie a hidden function in a larger scheme. She realized that the betrayal was not impulsive or accidental. It had been orchestrated, deliberate, and carefully concealed. The enormity of it hit her in waves, alternating between shock and focused resolve. A silence fell, brief but deafening, as the full scope of the truth settled between them. She could almost feel it, like a physical presence in the room, pressing against her chest, demanding acknowledgement. Her eyes locked on his, unwavering, forcing him to face the consequences of his actions. The tension, which had been building for weeks, reached its absolute peak, leaving only the raw, unfiltered essence of betrayal and confrontation. Then came the moment of reckoning. Words were no longer enough. The truth demanded action. She presented evidence, recounted incidents, and laid bare the extent of manipulation with an intensity that left no room for evasion. Every rationalization, every excuse, crumbled in the presence of clarity, and she saw in his expression the recognition of total exposure. The finality of the revelation was absolute. There was no turning back, no reconstruction of the past, only a reckoning that would alter everything. As the minutes stretched, the room felt suspended in time. She breathed deliberately, feeling the rush of adrenaline ebbing slowly, leaving a raw clarity in its wake. The storm had reached its apex, a turbulent force that had stripped illusions, forced honesty, and demanded courage. In the silence that followed, she understood the power of truth, unflinching, relentless, and transformative. Every thought she had carried through weeks of suspicion crystallized now. She realized that the climax was not simply about exposing deception, but about reclaiming herself. Every fragment of betrayal, every hidden motive, had been a test of her resilience, her perception, and her strength. Standing there, at the pinnacle of confrontation, she recognized the magnitude of what had been endured, and the first glimmer of empowerment that would guide her forward. Every instinct in her body screamed that the moment had arrived, the tipping point where revelation collided with consequence. The tension in the air was almost physical, a weight pressing against her chest and radiating outward, making the walls of the room feel alive with anticipation. Her senses sharpened. She noticed subtle tremors in his hands, the slight quiver of his lips, the way his eyes darted toward the floor before meeting hers again. Each detail was a thread, weaving a story that could no longer remain concealed. She advanced deliberately, her presence commanding without a word. Her gaze cut through pretense, piercing the veil of deception that had long shielded him. He tried to steady himself, but the cracks were evident. Hesitations, fragmented explanations, evasive gestures, all revealing the intricate artifice he had built around the truth. She listened, analyzed, and responded with precision, letting no misdirection escape scrutiny. Voices rose, but not in chaos. They danced on the razor's edge of confrontation, alternating between accusation, defense, and confession. She articulated every detail she had unearthed, connecting moments, actions, and omissions into a coherent narrative. Lies that had seemed harmless were exposed as deliberate manipulations, and carefully crafted explanations crumbled under the clarity of her observations. The truth became undeniable in its magnitude and implications. Her body trembled, not from weakness, but from the intensity of awareness. Emotions surged in rapid succession. Disbelief, fury, sorrow, and a piercing sense of liberation intertwined, creating a tumult that felt almost unbearable. She refused to let the rawness of feeling overwhelm judgment. Each reaction was carefully measured, a tool to maintain authority in the face of chaos. The confrontation became a duel of perception and will, each party acutely aware of the stakes, each movement charged with significance. Subtle revelations escalated into irrefutable exposure. Hidden correspondences, overlooked gestures, and private conversations, all coalesced into a complete map of deception. She could trace the steps, motivations, and intentions of his actions, realizing the sheer scale of manipulation that had been orchestrated around her. The room felt suspended, time dilated, each second magnified, every heartbeat a drum signaling the inevitability of reckoning. Her voice, steady yet unwavering, carried the weight of months spent observing, questioning, and unraveling lies. Each sentence was an assertion of power, a reclamation of agency that forced acknowledgement. He faltered repeatedly, his defenses collapsing under scrutiny. The masks of normalcy, the carefully constructed facades, fell away like brittle shells, leaving nothing but exposed vulnerability. Physical sensations mirrored the intensity of the moment. Her pulse raced, palms tingled, and breath came in shallow, deliberate draws. Every sense was attuned to subtle cues. The slight shift of his posture, the micro-expressions betraying emotion he wished to hide, the nervous tapping of a finger, the shallow inhale signaling guilt. The confrontation was a battlefield of awareness, each observation a strategic advantage. As the climax stretched onward, revelations intensified, layer upon layer. Secrets previously hidden in shadows were illuminated, and the weight of truth pressed relentlessly. She realized the confrontation was not just about discovering what had been done. It was about asserting control over a reality that had been manipulated, reclaiming clarity, and drawing boundaries that could no longer be crossed. The final moments arrived in a tense silence, pregnant with consequence. Her eyes, unwavering, captured every nuance, every flicker of emotion. The culmination of weeks of suspicion, analysis, and emotional turbulence now converged into a single, undeniable truth. She understood that this was the turning point. The moment where all pretense ended, where exposure met accountability, and where the possibility of transformation became tangible. In the aftermath of revelation, the energy in the room remained electric. She could feel the surge of power, clarity, and autonomy that followed unmasking the deception. The climax was no longer merely about confrontation. It was about a profound shift in perspective, the reassertion of self, and the awakening of inner strength that had been tempered by betrayal, doubt, and emotional turmoil. She stood at the apex, fully present, acutely aware, and irrevocably changed. The confrontation had ended, but the aftershocks of truth reverberated through every corner of her life. She sat quietly at her desk, letting the silence stretch, feeling the residual tension drain slowly, leaving only the raw, unfiltered sense of awareness. Her mind, once a whirlwind of suspicion and fear, now processed each event with measured clarity. She realized that the tumult of the past weeks, though painful, had offered a perspective she had never before possessed. A lens to see the intentions, motives, and actions around her with unclouded precision. Returning home felt different. Every step through her apartment seemed deliberate, as though she were reclaiming space previously occupied by doubt and unease. The familiar surroundings no longer felt oppressive. They were neutral ground, empty canvases upon which she could rebuild, rearrange, and redefine her life. Even the photographs, once symbols of fractured memories, now offered a sense of continuity, a reminder that experiences, whether joyful or devastating, contributed to her strength and wisdom. She allowed herself the luxury of reflection, pondering the intricate interplay between trust, expectation, and perception. The betrayal that had once seemed insurmountable now appeared as a puzzle she had successfully decoded. Every fragment of misinformation, every subtle manipulation, now sat clearly within the broader picture. Rather than inducing despair, this recognition offered empowerment. She understood where boundaries had been crossed, where vigilance was required, and how to safeguard her emotional landscape moving forward. Sleep arrived naturally that night, uninterrupted and restorative. For the first time in weeks, she did not awaken in a panic, nor did she lie awake tracing hidden motives and imagined scenarios. Instead, dreams flowed with possibility, interweaving hope and vision with the clarity of insight she had gained. She awoke feeling grounded, her chest lighter, her mind alert, and her determination renewed. She recognized that the past could not be rewritten, yet the future remained hers to shape with intention, courage, and discernment. At work, the transformation was palpable. She moved through the environment with a quiet authority, her steps purposeful, her gaze sharp, and her interactions deliberate. Colleagues noticed the change. A subtle confidence, a poise tempered by experience, and a sense of awareness that suggested she had weathered storms invisible to them. Meetings were approached with focus, decisions made with meticulous attention, and conversations navigated with intuition honed by recent trials. She understood the dynamics of influence, manipulation, and perception, and used that knowledge to operate with strategic clarity. Every decision she made in the following days reflected a careful balance of caution and empowerment. Relationships were reevaluated, boundaries were asserted, and trust was extended selectively. She discovered a new rhythm to daily life, one informed by insight rather than fear, vigilance rather than paranoia, and clarity rather than confusion. Each interaction became an opportunity to practice discernment, to reinforce agency, and to cultivate a sense of stability previously undermined by deception. She spent time reconnecting with herself, indulging in small acts that had been neglected, cooking meals without distraction, reading quietly in the sunlight, and taking walks that allowed her to breathe deeply, appreciating the simplicity of moments she had previously overlooked. These practices were not mere distractions. They were rituals of restoration, each one reinforcing the newfound balance in her mind and spirit. Her relationships began to evolve. Conversations with colleagues shifted from routine to meaningful, marked by both authenticity and boundaries. Interactions with her spouse, while still fraught with complexity, gained clarity through frank discussion and careful observation. The equilibrium she had attained was fragile but real, grounded in the understanding that empowerment was not about vengeance, but about clarity, integrity, and the courage to act from a place of knowledge. She reflected often on the lessons embedded within the ordeal. Trust, she realized, was a privilege, not an obligation. Perception, once sharpened, could act as both shield and compass. And resilience was cultivated not through avoidance of hardship, but through confrontation, acknowledgement, and adaptation. The experience had reshaped her worldview, instilling a profound sense of agency and purpose. By the end of the month, The chaos that had once dominated her life had given way to structure, awareness, and deliberate choice. Her emotional energy, once fragmented, now flowed with intent. Decisions were made with confidence, interactions navigated with precision, and the sense of self, once clouded by doubt, emerged stronger, wiser, and more grounded. She understood that life would continue to present challenges, but she was equipped to face them with clarity, strength, and unwavering presence. In moments of quiet reflection, she acknowledged the full arc of her journey, from suspicion to revelation, from confrontation to resolution. She had endured betrayal, navigated emotional upheaval, and confronted deception with courage and insight. Now, in the calm aftermath, she could move forward intentionally, aware that every choice, every boundary, and every step was a reclamation of her life, her identity, and her power. The days that followed felt both heavy and liberating. She moved through them with a deliberate rhythm, paying attention to nuances that had once gone unnoticed. Even routine tasks, the hum of the coffee maker, the gentle sway of curtains in the afternoon breeze, the soft tap of her heels on the floor, felt imbued with significance, as if each small action was a reminder of regained control. The ordinary had been transformed, every gesture and glance now resonating with clarity. At work, she noticed subtleties that had previously escaped her attention. Emails carried hidden intentions, body language spoke volumes, and office dynamics revealed layers of influence she had once underestimated. Each observation became a tool, allowing her to act decisively, to navigate interactions with a strategic awareness she had never possessed. She was no longer merely responding. She was anticipating, understanding, and choosing her moves with purpose. Conversations with colleagues shifted naturally. Where there had once been tension or casual chatter, she now created meaningful dialogue, asking questions that uncovered truth and offered perspective. Her presence commanded attention, not through intimidation, but through focus, insight, and quiet confidence. She realized that influence did not require control over others, but clarity within oneself, a lesson she had absorbed through the confrontation and its aftermath. At home, she reclaimed her environment with small but intentional acts. She rearranged furniture to create space that felt open and welcoming, discarded items that symbolized stagnation, and curated spaces that encouraged calm reflection. Even the simplest routines, making tea, reading by the window, listening to music, became rituals of restoration. These moments reminded her that stability and peace were cultivated deliberately, not inherited or granted by circumstance. Relationships, once strained, now unfolded under new terms. Boundaries were established with care and precision, trust was extended slowly, and interactions were guided by awareness rather than assumption. She approached each conversation with intentionality, recognizing that healthy connection required honesty, respect, and mutual effort. The clarity she had gained from the confrontation allowed her to differentiate between genuine loyalty and performative gestures, empowering her to invest energy wisely. Emotionally, she felt a profound shift. The weight of betrayal no longer dominated her thoughts. Instead, it had been transformed into wisdom, resilience, and discernment. She allowed herself to feel fully, grief, frustration, even fleeting moments of sadness, without letting them dictate behavior. Each emotional wave became an opportunity to strengthen self-awareness, to refine judgment, and to reinforce the inner authority she had claimed. She also began to envision the future with renewed clarity. Career decisions, personal aspirations, and long-term goals were examined with a lens sharpened by experience. No longer did she act out of habit or obligation. Every choice was deliberate, grounded in knowledge and purpose. Opportunities that might once have seemed risky now appeared navigable, challenges no longer insurmountable. She recognized that empowerment lay not in avoiding adversity, but in approaching it with insight, preparation, and unshakable presence. Even moments of solitude became instructive. During quiet walks, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The confrontation, the unraveling of deception, the emotional turbulence, and the painstaking reclamation of self. Each reflection reinforced her understanding that growth often emerges through trials, and that clarity is won through perseverance, observation, and courage. By the end of the month, a sense of equilibrium settled over her. She had transformed turmoil into purpose, fear into discernment, and uncertainty into actionable knowledge. The lessons she had learned were deeply internalized, no longer abstract concepts but living principles guiding every action, every decision, and every interaction. Life, once unpredictable and threatening, now offered a canvas of opportunity, one she could navigate with confidence, resilience, and awareness. The resolution was not a return to the past but the creation of a new present, one crafted intentionally from the fragments of experience. She had endured deception, confronted the hidden truths, and emerged with a profound understanding of herself, others, and the subtle currents that shape daily life. Stability, clarity, and empowerment were now her companions, and she understood that this foundation would guide her through any challenge that lay ahead. Even in small victories, an honest conversation, a clear decision, a well-managed interaction, she felt the tangible effects of transformation. She had reclaimed authority over her emotional, personal, and professional domains, demonstrating that resilience is forged through confrontation, clarity, and unwavering self-awareness. By embracing both the lessons and the consequences of recent events, she had constructed a life that was no longer reactive but intentional. Each morning brought focus, each choice brought agency, and each relationship reflected the wisdom she had gained. She had discovered that real strength is not merely surviving hardships but understanding them, learning from them, and using that insight to craft a life aligned with truth, integrity, and purpose. She sat quietly as the evening light filtered through the window, soft and steady, casting gentle patterns across the room. In that calm, she allowed herself to reflect fully, unhurried, on everything that had transpired. The betrayal, the confrontation, and the long, intense resolution had left indelible marks, but now those marks were not wounds. They were lessons embedded in her consciousness like guiding stars. She realized that life was often less about avoiding suffering and more about learning how to navigate it with awareness, dignity, and courage. The events she had endured had shown her the fragility of assumptions. People, intentions, and appearances were not always reliable indicators of truth. She had trusted blindly, had overlooked subtle signs, and had assumed loyalty where there was none. The experience forced her to examine every interaction with discernment, teaching her that vigilance was not paranoia but a form of self-respect, a necessary lens through which to view the world with both caution and confidence. She understood now that empowerment did not come from controlling others. It came from mastering her own perception, emotions, and choices. Every decision moving forward would be grounded in clarity rather than hope, in awareness rather than habit. Life had provided a crucible of experiences, testing her resilience and forcing her to confront reality without flinching. She had passed that test, not unscathed, but wiser, stronger, and more fully awake to the intricacies of human behavior. Reflection deepened as she considered the value of boundaries. Trust was no longer automatic. It was something earned, something that required observation, honesty, and respect. She saw clearly now that self-preservation was not selfishness. It was a fundamental necessity. To navigate relationships with integrity, she would need to protect her emotional energy, choose connections deliberately, and invest in those who reciprocated authenticity. The power of choice became vividly apparent. Every moment offered opportunity, to speak or stay silent, to act or wait, to engage or withdraw. She realized that freedom was not merely the absence of deception but the ability to make intentional decisions grounded in understanding and insight. Life, she understood, would always present challenges, but within each challenge lay the potential to grow, to assert agency, and to refine judgment. Even small moments gained significance. The clarity to make a simple decision, what to eat, how to respond, how to prioritize time, was no longer trivial. Each choice was a reaffirmation of autonomy, a reminder that she was no longer a passive participant in her own life. The mundane became meaningful because she was now fully conscious, fully present, and fully responsible for her own experience. She also reflected on the nature of resilience. True strength was not a stoic suppression of emotion but the ability to feel fully, process deeply, and act with purpose despite vulnerability. Tears, sorrow, and anger were not weaknesses. They were catalysts, signals that allowed her to understand herself more completely and to act with greater clarity. She saw that the emotional storms she had endured had forged a durable inner strength, one that would guide her through unforeseen trials with composure and insight. Her reflection extended to gratitude. She recognized the value of perspective. Having confronted deceit and reclaimed agency, she now appreciated moments of honesty, transparency, and authenticity more profoundly. Friendships, family interactions, and professional relationships all gained new meaning. She no longer took them for granted, understanding that true connection required vigilance, mutual respect, and deliberate nurturing. Looking ahead, she envisioned a life built upon intentionality, not chance. Career decisions would be made with discernment, personal interactions guided by observation, and emotional investments managed with both heart and intellect. The clarity she had gained would act as both compass and shield, allowing her to navigate uncertainty without fear, and to embrace opportunities with wisdom and confidence. Ultimately, she realized that the ordeal had transformed her perception of self. She was no longer defined by past trust or past betrayal. She was defined by her capacity to learn, adapt, and act with integrity. The emotional intensity, the confrontation, and the painstaking reclamation of clarity had not weakened her. They had strengthened her resolve, sharpened her instincts, and deepened her understanding of what it meant to live deliberately. In the quiet of reflection, she smiled softly, acknowledging that empowerment was not a destination but a continuous process. Life's trials would continue, but she now possessed the tools to navigate them fully awake, with agency, insight, and courage. She understood that the most profound victories were not always external. They were internal. The mastery of perception, the resilience of spirit, and the unwavering commitment to live authentically, guided by truth and clarity. Her story, once defined by deception and doubt, now reflected transformation. The lessons learned through confrontation and reflection were her inheritance. Wisdom, strength, clarity, and the profound understanding that life's challenges were opportunities to awaken fully, act decisively, and embrace the future with both courage and hope. The moral was simple yet powerful. Life's trials shape resilience, truth illuminates empowerment, and self-awareness becomes the foundation upon which every meaningful choice and every enduring connection is built. She had endured, she had reflected, and she was ready, not just to survive but to thrive.